Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sophia, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Beth Kobliner's late parents, Harold and Shirley Kobliner's book, so to speak, 11,000 Expressions That'll Knock Your Socks Off, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us Beth Kobliner for the launch of her parents' book, so to speak, 11,000 Expressions That'll Knock Your Socks Off. Shirley and Harold Kobliner developed their own passion project over the last decade of their 65 years of marriage, gathering and talking about the expressions that make language so vibrant. Both career educators, they spent more than a half-century nurturing and teaching children. Harold received his PhD from New York University School of Education and became principal of the award-winning Marie Curie Junior High School in Queens, New York. He was also chairman of the Board of Examiners, an independent agency that created and administered tests to teachers, principals, and superintendents throughout New York City. He was named the U.S. Army Soldier of the Month for creating a program for soldiers to earn high school diplomas. Shirley received a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and was a high school chemistry teacher in a number of New York City high schools. She was also one of the earliest supporters of ANIBIC, the Association of Neurologically Impaired Brain Injured Children, an after-school resource and learning program for children with disabilities. Harold and Shirley raised 3 kids who have given them 6 wonderful, expressions-obsessed grandchildren. They all add up to one big family that views thinking about expressions not only as a joyful and educational exercise, but also as a bonding experience. Beth Kobliner has been reporting and writing about personal finance for decades and is the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Make Your Kid a Money Genius, Even If You're Not, and Get a Financial Life, Personal Finance in Your 20s and 30s. She has contributed to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and has appeared on ABC's Good Morning America, PBS NewsHour, CNN, and NPR. Her favorite gig was teaching Elmo the basics of saving, spending, and sharing on Sesame Street. Joining Beth in conversation is Theresa DiMasi. Theresa joined Simon & Schuster as founding publisher and head of product for Tiller Press in 2018. Hired to architect and launch Tiller as a new way of publishing, using data and trends to acquire books, Theresa was responsible for hiring a team of data scientists, data analysts, editors, designers, and marketers to make good on that promise. Tiller focuses on publishing timely, culturally relevant titles and properties in the categories of food and writing, wellness and well-being, home, workplace, parenting, travel, memoir, and civic engagement. Tiller is home to such best-selling titles as Cook Anime, Under the Black Hat, My Life in the WWE and Beyond, Meals That Heal, Inspire Your Home, and Deep Kindness, a revolutionary guide to the way we think, talk, and act in kindness. So, without further ado, please welcome Beth Kobliner and Theresa DiMasi to the stage.
Okay, I think we're here now. Okay, so as I was saying, I found this book to be very fun, very charming, and real. It felt like it came from a place of love and family. I wasn't fortunate enough to meet your parents, but I feel like I got to know them through the process of working with you and editing this book. So, can you tell us a little bit about Harold and Shirley and how this book came about?
Yes. First, thank you so much, Theresa. You have been such a wonderful guiding light in this whole experience. I wanted to thank the Strand. Thank you, Sophia and Sabir and Nancy Bass for allowing us to talk today. This is just wonderful. And Theresa and her team at Tiller at Simon & Schuster have been unbelievable. I want to thank John Karp. This book was written by my parents. I want to be really clear about that. I sort of came in the 11th hour. Like Theresa said, we met and got to come home and tell my father they want it. They want the book. And he was so excited. But my parents also turned to a lot of different people to create the book. And I wanted to do a quick shout out to my brothers, Perry and Kenneth Kobliner, and the grandkids, Rebecca, Adam, Benjamin, Josh, Shara, and Jacob, and David and Miriam, and all our dear friends and family. You all know who you are. It's been an incredible journey with so many people over more than a dozen years working on this. I'd say the thing about my parents is that they had been happily married for 65 years. That's what you need to know about them most. My father was a PhD in education, and like the introduction said, he really spoke up for people in underserved communities, whether it was soldiers who needed high school diplomas, or special education, children in special education classes, or children who he wanted to see have qualified teachers. My mom was a chemistry teacher, but she was also a really good writer, which is an unusual combination. And she loved being a mother, and she was just full of joy. So this book stemmed from my parents' love of language and love of each other. But I also think it was all about making language accessible to people. I mean, I've given this a lot of thought over, being in this crazy situation the whole world is in, but having time to think about it and really look at the book and spend a lot of time with it. It was about sharing language, and everybody has an opportunity to talk about the expressions that are important to them. So yeah, my dad, the only other thing I wanted to say was my dad, he read the dictionary when he was a child. Because they didn't have many books and it was what he had. So he had a phenomenal vocabulary, and he actually taught the SAT English part to high school students when I remember being a kid and knowing that. But the sort of origin story of the book was my parents went to our youngest, Jacob's, nursery school class, and they were there to read a story to the children. And the kids were all squirmy, and my mother said, "Oh, it looks like you all have ants in your pants." And the kids were like, "Ants in your pants." They never heard of that expression, and they kind of went crazy. And then my parents started to explain what that meant. And that sort of inspired them to say, you know what, we should preserve expressions and we should celebrate expressions. Let's do a book. And out of this kind of kooky lark that they, an idea that they had, it ended up, it's now the largest collection of expressions of its kind, which is kind of crazy.
So, Beth, can you tell us a little bit more? You gave us some highlights of how the book came to be about and the story, but can you dig in a little bit and tell us about your parents' process in writing the book?
Sure. Well, they started working on it when they were in their mid-70s. I think this is a picture of them actually in their early 80s. They look pretty damn good. I mean, they were, very young 70s. And they made a decision they wanted to practice the art of listening. So they would only include expressions they could see with their own eyes or hear with their own ears. And so that meant either what they saw on TV, usually the news or NPR, or from the expressions they heard from friends, and then the doctor, and then this nurse, and then the optician, and then at the theater. So they really were just absorbing. Anytime they met anyone, they told them about this expressions book. And actually, I saw this on my daughter's Instagram, and I want to tell this story because it's so funny. Years ago, we were at a Mike Birbiglia concert. He was giving a performance, and we loved Mike Birbiglia. And we were there, and we were sitting in the very front. And my dad always carried around a little notebook because if he was anywhere, he wanted to jot down an expression. So Mike Birbiglia was doing his thing, And my dad sort of, very discreetly took out his book and started writing things down. And Mike Birbiglia stopped talking and he said, "Wait a second." He said, are you a critic? And my dad's like, no. And he's like, "What are you writing down?" And my dad's like, nothing, go on with your show. And then he's like, no, what is it? And it got a little intense. And my dad, he was a tough principal from Queens, so he didn't get fazed. And finally he said to him, "I'm writing a book on expressions and you said an expression and I just wanted to write it down." So that was my dad. Like wherever they went, my parents would hear expressions and write them down. And that was kind of the joy for them of that kind of thing. I mean, they would then sit together. Once they had about 100 expressions, they would sit together and they would sort through them. So if it was like the expression fast as a rabbit and hungry as a lion, that would go into animals. Then busy as a bee, well, that would go into animals, except they realized they had too many animals with wings, things with wings. So they changed that to the category birds, bats, and insects. And it was sort of funny. The one sort of charming thing is not only the way they collected and categorized these expressions, but how they wrote them down. I don't know if I explained this to you, Theresa, but you know how like when you go to the dry cleaner and you get back a shirt that was that's pressed, sometimes they'll have like those shirt cardboards, the pieces of cardboard that are lovely pieces of cardboard that you could write on. And so my mom never threw anything out. So this was a great use of cardboard. So I found them, and they had like 100 of these. And they would write down the expression, and then my dad would cross it out in red and circle it. And eventually they ran out of cardboards and they turned to legal pads. And then eventually we helped them get on, to a computer spreadsheet. But the old-fashioned beautiful way of collecting these expressions was also so sweet and kind of moving. But they would get together as a committee with whether when they were younger they would do it on their own. That's them. My dad has this note card there talking about expressions, and they would gather the grandkids and talk about it. But even when my mom was getting ill, when she was, in her mid-80s, she got ill, but she would still be part of the committee, and they'd sit and go through. And if I were there, I'd be part of the committee, or if there was a nurse there, the nurse would be part of the committee, and figuring out where the expressions go. And my mom used to say that was her favorite part of the whole process, was talking about expressions and speaking about them and never using Google. That was the big thing. They never used Google, and they never would peek at other expression lists, which was, a sort of feeling of ethics for them. They would never look at other lists, and using Google wasn't their thing. They didn't know how to use Google, but even if they did know how to use it, they didn't like that idea.
Yeah. I love that they didn't use Google. And you were talking about some of those note cards, and like on the inside cover of the book, if you could all see, this is the book, the beautiful book, but on the inside cover, you get to see some of the real note cards, right?
Yeah.
Which is great. It's really fun. You open up the book and you start with that, and it just feels so real. There was a story I think you told me about the grandkids and how they would incentivize.
Right. So it's so funny because once they got to like 8,000 expressions, I mean, when you imagine 8,000 expressions, they were having trouble. Like, how do we find new ones? And they, ask people around, and every, the news, something would come up that they didn't have. But they figured, my dad was like, we have to start paying our grandkids $1 for every expression they find, because he wanted to, generate some interest there. So, my daughter would be, emailing lists of expressions so she could have a little money, and eventually I think they got to like 500, and my dad's like, enough, this is going to make me broke, I'm not going to do it anymore. But it was always like it was always about educating and kind of having fun while doing it. So yeah, no, That is pretty funny.
That's really great. So one of the things I found unique and charming about the book is the way that the expressions are categorized. It's not what one would expect. Can you talk a little bit about how your parents went about organizing the expressions into, I think it's 67 categories?
Right. Well, this is, I think, part of the quirky genius of their book, that they would discuss and debate. So again, they have 11,000 expressions. So every single expression in the book was talked about and analyzed. Sometimes they'd even argue. My mom would say, Harold, that's not an expression. It's not really an idiom. It's more of an adage. They would have all these discussions about it. And what I love is that through the expressions you use or which expressions they really focused on, I feel like you can see a little bit of what mattered to them, a little bit of who they are, an insight into who they are. So for example, there's a chapter called Transportation and Travel. And in that chapter, there are obvious expressions like frequent flyer or vacation mode or maiden voyage. But there are also expressions that really indicate the depths of my mother's amazing ability to pack a suitcase. Before a trip, my mom would start a week before and line up all the clothes and sort of really methodically have tissue paper and a whole process. So if you look in Transportation and Travel, there are so many packing expressions like send them packing, time to pack it in, pack light, carry excess baggage. It's sort of a good lens into what was going on for them. But there are 67 chapters or categories, and the largest category was the body category, which has over 1,000 expressions. And the smallest, I was going to ask you, Theresa, put you on the spot to see if you remember or recall what the smallest category was. There's no reason you would.
No, yeah, I don't.
Well, the smallest category was postal. And it's so indicative of, first of all, what generation they're from, because the post office is where it was at. They were doing a little email, and I thought, oh, that's sort of interesting. But then the expressions in postal are really good ones, like to seal the deal, to go postal, push the envelope, mail it in, part and parcel. So there are only 25 expressions in postal, but they're good ones. And I guess I'd say the last part here is, one of my favorite things about the book is that my parents often categorized expressions based on keywords rather than the literal meaning, which led to some very entertaining results. Like if you look at the chapter, the law, in it, the law, there are expressions like rush to judgment or thick as thieves or good cop, bad cop, which are ones you'd expect in the law. But then you see an expression like, they got the expression to conduct a sting operation. And when you hear that, you think, it conjures up the FBI, agents, secret agents undercover. But instead of putting it in the law, they put it into birds, bats, and insects, because sting is the sort of predominant word in sting operation. And then when they found this illustration, when you put it all together, it makes it clear that with the beehive and the bees buzzing around, sting operation clearly does belong in birds, bats, and insects. So again, the point is that they had so much fun with this, and 11,000 times they would go through that whole exercise of where should it go and how should it be illustrated, what should it be, and what I said before, that they really cared about bringing language to everyone and talking to everyone about, well, what kind of expressions do you remember as a kid? Or if you're a kid, what are some of the newer expressions? But what's been very surprising, honestly, to me, is that when we sent out the book in the galley form, a lot of language experts and lexicographers, which I didn't even know what they were, but they're people who compile dictionaries, wrote back and said, this is an astonishing collection. And one said, yes, it's definitely good for lay people, but it's an important development in computational linguistics, because it's an important resource, they said, for natural language processing, because there aren't many collections, if any, a large collection of multi-word expressions, and apparently that's difficult to look at on a computer. And I mean, who knew? Like, I just thought it was like this quirky book, but the idea that, you know, in the field of words, there isn't really anything like it.
Yeah. I think that speaks to just how this book can be enjoyed on so many different levels. You can dip in and out. You know, the chapters, some are short, some are shorter than others. I remember animals being long. You can just pick it up, browse for a few minutes, put it down, pick it up again, and it's just, it depends so many levels. You can get such enjoyment and such education out of it as well. So I wanted to talk about the words. I want to talk a little bit about the illustration, because when we first talked about it, we weren't really talking about illustrations. And I think at some point we had this aha moment on how these expressions, how much more they can be brought to life and come alive on each page. Can you talk a little bit about the illustrations and give some examples?
Right. Well, you were amazing on this, as was Anya Schmidt, who's the executive editor, and Patrick Sullivan, who's an amazing art director. And I remember early on we talked about, oh, should there be little pictures scattered throughout, but we were unsure. Then the pandemic hit. The whole thing was kind of crazy. When Patrick Sullivan sent the covers and I showed them to my dad, they were all different colors, and my dad immediately liked that yellow one, which we ended up with. And he, there are beautiful vintage illustrations on the covers. And so I asked Patrick where they were from, and he said the British Library Archive, and there are literally a million illustrations on the British Library Archive that are free, so anyone could use them, and they're gorgeous. And but my dad, he looked at the cover and he's like, I like the color, I like the idea of the illustrations, but I really think that if you look at the cover, you should know exactly what the expression is by looking at the illustration. And I was like, that's really smart. He's like, if there's an elephant on the cover, you don't know it's elephant in the room, so you need context. You need a room. I mean, my dad was 90, and he was like, sharp as a whip. And sharp as a whip, there's an expression. And I said, you're right. So basically, I talked to Patrick, and he's like, here, you know, you can go and look through all these expressions, you know, all these, not expressions, all these illustrations to see if you can find, you know, pair expressions with illustrations. And I mean, I thought, you know, we could just go through a handful of them because they're so fun, like the chapter education, which was something that mattered a lot to my parents. So we have, this one would be to do the math. And this one is no easy answers. And this one is one of my favorites, too cool for school, which this illustration is from 1898. And to me, it looks so modern, and I don't know, I felt like, you know, doing these pairings was certainly, you know, a really fun aspect to it. And the next category of food and cooking. So there's the obvious ones like get a piece of a pie and a tough nut to crack. That's definitely a guessable one. And back in the soup, which is like crazy. Like, what was this image from? But it was, I think, some story written in the 1800s. And again, in the chapter Food and Cooking, what I love is that you have the obvious expressions like baked in the cake or piece of the pie. But then you also had non-obvious ones, like they put to curry favor. They put that in food because it's curry, or grilled by the police. They put that in food because it's grilled. So, you know, my dad was really actively involved in this whole phase, but at a certain point with all the illustrations, and he was saying, you know what, you can handle part of this. And I have to say, there was nothing more fun. If there's ever a job of matching illustrations to expressions, I want that job, because it was joyful. And like you said, it sort of gives you a different take on words and wordplay. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, that was so fun. I remember those days of like sitting down and figuring all of that out. That was great. So one of the aspects I also love best about the book is how interactive it is. So there's a section at the end of the book called Express Yourself, and there's also dozens of fun games that people can play with the book, and that's at the front of the book. So there's like 2 or 3, 4 pages of that. So overall, it's really a great mechanism or a great way to start conversation, which these days doesn't always happen unless we're shouting at each other, right? Or taking sides. And so this is a nice way to bridge and to talk with one another. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the intention behind that?
Yeah, well, honestly, at first, this project definitely sounded a bit eccentric to our family, but it soon became totally addictive. I would find my husband, who's nocturnal anyway, but he'd be up all night and be like, "Oh, what are you working on?" He's a scientist, and he'd be like, "Look, I have a list of 84 expressions. I wonder if your father has these." I'm like, "Okay," and then my dad would call the next day, and he'd say, "Beth, I feel terrible, but I had all the ones David sent. Could you tell him? I don't have the heart to tell him." And so we all just got really into it. And the idea of what started as a lark or a hobby turned into this book, this giant collection. And I think one of the sort of wonderful things about expressions is they're more than just words. They're really indicative of where you're from, who you knew, what era you're from, where you lived. I mean, it's very much reflecting your life. And sometimes people get sort of tricked, and they assume that an expression that they heard their whole lives is an expression that everyone knows. One of my favorite stories is my parents' friend Diane, who I think is here, and her mom was from Ireland, and her mother would always use the old Irish expression, "as fast as O'Grady's dog." So if you said to a child, "Stop eating so fast, you're eating as fast as O'Grady's dog," that meant you're eating too fast. And so Diane heard that expression her whole life, and she used it with her own children. And then she met a childhood friend of her mother's who started talking about the old neighborhood in Ireland and the O'Grady family, and they had this dog. And that's when it dawned on her. She's like, "Oh, as fast as O'Grady's dog" was not an old Irish expression. It was just a personal one, known only to her mother and her mother's neighbors in the family, but they used it so often that they assumed it was an old Irish expression. So express yourself is for that, your family expressions or expressions you find that aren't in the book. Like today I thought of one, callow youth, that he's a callow youth, that's an expression, and it's not in the book. I can't believe it. So, you write it down, or any other expressions with children. Of course, it's always fun. You can make them up. And the games, I think, my parents knew they needed something to tie the book together. So they worked on different games. And I think what you were saying earlier is so true that, during this very tough time in our country and how people, if you're lucky enough to be able to stay home, then you're stuck at home, and families are together more than they've ever been in many cases. So games are getting big, and I think that people are looking for things to do. So people have been telling me that, "Oh, wow, I really like the games in the book." Because, of course, you can read the book out loud or you can peruse it. I mean, there's different ways of using it. But the word games offer kind of like a roadmap for interesting ways to have fun with expressions. And I think that what with the illustrations too, it's sort of, there are a lot of opportunities for guessing games. And the illustrations that you guess are guessable, because my dad insisted on that. But there are, a couple of dozen games, and I wanted to know, Theresa, if you wanted to just play a few of them.
Oh boy.
Yeah, to cap off the night.
Right. Sure. I'll give it a shot.
Okay. So I think we have one. Yep. Okay, that's an easy one.
Elephant in the room.
Very good. That one.
Huh. Coming out of your shell.
Exactly.
Okay.
This is not rehearsed, everyone. So this one's tricky.
Throwing ball, juggling many balls. Or juggle. Some days it juggle.
So this one, and of course this is up for debate, but this one we listed as keep your eye on the ball. Intently, but it could be juggling many balls. Well, it's one ball, so maybe not. But I'll do the next one. The next one is hard, but it's fun.
Wheels, like, I don't know.
So it's like if you went on a date and you're single, but you go with your friends who are a couple, you feel like the
Third wheel.
Yep.
Perfect.
And this last one is I don't know if you can tell what he's doing.
He's holding books. Balancing books.
There you go. You got it. Good. And then, obviously you don't have to use just British drawings. I think that people can put expressions to family pictures. Like here they're kicking up their heels and happy as a clam. Or this next one, that's them in, I think it's like 1946, where they're callow youths, diamonds in the rough. And this last one, they're two peas in a pod in their golden years. So I wanted to know, Theresa, we can wrap things up with a quick round of my favorite game, real or fake.
Okay.
I didn't know there'd be a test, did you?
For all games that you do virtually too, by the way. That's what's the benefit of this book also. So you can gather with friends virtually and do this.
Totally.
I've done that actually, and it's so much fun. Okay.
Yeah. So okay. So is this one real or fake? Fuzzy as powder in water.
I haven't heard of it, so I'm going to say it's fake.
Correct. It's fake.
Okay.
Okay. It's always darkest under the lighthouse.
Yes. I think that's true.
You're right.
Real. Okay.
You're right. A yellow dog contract.
Yes, that's real.
Right. It's when, in the olden days, they would say, okay, you can join, we're going to hire you, but you have to agree not to join a union. So it's illegal. Right. And the last one, even the smartest cow is illiterate.
Don't know. I haven't heard of it, so I'm going to say it's fake.
You're right. It's fake.
Okay.
And the last ones, you did excellent. You got 100% there. Okay, malaprops. Is it dog eat dog or dog eat dog?
Dog eat dog.
Right. Is it to home in or to hone in?
I would say it's home in.
Yes, that's right. Oh, see, you're an editor. This isn't fair. This is not fair. This is chomping at the bit or chomping at the bit. Champing at the bit or chomping at the bit.
Chomping.
It's champing. It started as champing, yes, which means to chew, and then it developed into chomping. So,
okay.
Cinch the deal. This is the last one. Cinch the deal or clinch the deal.
Clinch the deal.
That's right.
Okay. Those were easy. I wasn't sure about the fake and the real.
Yeah. No, so can I ask you a question if we have a minute? Because I just wanted to know what did you like about the book? I mean, maybe you said it at the beginning, but, because here I came to you and it was like my dad, explaining the story. Is there something that struck you about it that made you want to buy it?
Yeah, I think it's the story. I think it's how it came into being. And, we talked about it. I mean, when we first met, we talked for about 3 hours about the book. Like I guess we introduced ourselves. That was like 10 minutes or so. But the fact that you told me the story and how it came from, this, like I said at the beginning, this place of love and family, and that it connected you, as you were growing up, and your parents were helping all of these kids, and they got excited about it, and they were like, "Yes, I know this." It gave you a sense of, I can do this too. I can play, and it's also cross-generational, and the fact that you can see some of the, the way some of the expressions came, like, at a certain time period, you might say this, and the same meaning for, your 5-year-old, but it's the same meaning. So I just think, language is one of those things that connects people, and I think that that's what this book does. So I would say that's what really drew me to the book.
Oh, beautifully said.
and you, like, you represent it, right? You have just done this wonderful thing for your parents, getting goosebumps, and so to me, it is something that belongs out here in the world for all of us to enjoy.
Yeah, they really were extraordinary, and I think they left a mark on all of us and everyone. And it's so funny, even people who I, contact and say, "Oh, my parent," they're like, "Oh, the book is done. Oh, I'm so glad," that they were, because they engaged everyone.
Right. And it's so important. I mean, there is an element of being about the book and a connection, and you're not feeling alone, and we all can, work on this, and fun. Absolute fun. I'm always a fan of fun. So thank you. Thank you for coming over and meeting me.
Thank you for having us. I mean, my dad was just blown away, so it was really exciting.
Yeah. So I think we have a few minutes here for questions. I'm going to look if you're okay with that.
Sure.
So one of the questions we have, this is a good one. Since you're a personal finance expert, what are some of your favorite money expressions?
That's a good one. I don't know. Let me grab the book and see. What's good money expressions? There's a whole bunch in here. Let me see. HIJKLN. Sorry. Oh, here. Okay. A blank check, which is fun. I mean, I love that the buck stops here. That's kind of a cash cow. Turn on a dime. I mean, some of them, you wonder what that came from. Mad money. They have pages and pages and pages of money. And it's funny, like they'll have cheap thrills. So they have words related to money. Dip into your savings. I don't know. I could read a million of them. But that's a good question. I better practice if I get an interview question on that.
Funny. All right. So this is a little easier. What are your top 3 favorite expressions?
My top 3 favorite expressions?
Yes.
I don't know. I always go to the food ones, like baked in the cake and easy as pie. And maybe because it's snowing outside, I'm feeling, cozy. I loved on the cover, we have a feather in your cap. And that was an important one to my dad because he had a display in his junior high school that was for anytime any child did anything that was good, any commendation, he would put it up on this big display case that you see right when you come into the school, and he called it a feather in our cap. So each kid who would, so I like that one. What are some of your favorites? Do you have any favorites?
I also like the cooking ones. So I really like too many cooks spoil the broth. That's been always one of my favorites. What else do I like? I like what's done is done. It's a little bit about my philosophy too, right? What's done is done. Let's just move on.
That's a good one.
Or when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Like I like some of those motivating ones, but I like some of them are funny. Like he doesn't have a leg to stand on is a good one.
Right.
So yeah, there's so many. But and I find myself saying a lot of these and not even realizing I'm saying them.
It's true. And people are telling me that, and I have to look into this because this would make my parents so happy. People for whom English is a second language, could be very useful, because when you think about all these crazy idioms we have in our language, in English, that they don't make sense, So to learn them and to see a list of them could be helpful. I was looking at expressions from other countries. This is not, my parents didn't do that in the book, but I just saw an article about it. And I think it was in Sweden, to get into trouble, it's like you get your beard caught in the mailbox. Like that's an expression. And it is interesting. Or things that have changed, like you were saying, like there's to gossip, to like, what is it? Dirt, like to get the dirt on someone, or for young people, spill the tea. That was a new one to me, the idea of getting, gossip. So the way words change is sort of fascinating too.
It really is. Well, and so what's funny is that one of the questions I have here is, will you have a second volume for additional expressions?
I was thinking that it'd be good. Well, we were talking about a game. A game is a good idea. Or also, and I got a few emails from people who are like, I'm a writer and I love just having this here because I could just look up an expression, sort of the way I would always use the thesaurus to kind of come up with, or books of quotes. You can just flip and get one. But then I could see another book like of kid expressions, or expressions by kids or for kids, it's endless.
It's true. It's true. So, what's the strangest expression in your opinion?
Oh, strangest one. I'm not in love with eye for an eye. I mean, that has such a heavy meaning. Strangest. Let's see. I don't know. Do you have any ones that you feel are strange?
I can't think of any strange ones, but I always love the expressions that always like make me pause, like same, different.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, what that means. Right.
They sometimes will go.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's a good one. Or, well, one thing I noticed that was annoying, many of the expressions about women were a little bit negative. Like, it was hard to find positive ones. There was like, lazy Susan, Debbie Downer. And for men, it was like Dapper Dan, and a lot more positive ones. So that was kind of maybe not surprising, but disappointing. And I like the expression top shelf, top drawer. Of course, they have a whole category on house and home. So anything in a house and home that you would find.
That would be great. Okay, we have time for one last question. Just one last question. What did you learn about your parents that you maybe haven't had a sense of through the process of working on the book?
I think how I obviously love my parents, but I feel like I didn't realize how genius they were, in the sense of not only, what somebody once said to my parent, like people would say to them, how have you been happily married for 65 years? How is that possible? And my dad, and they heard somewhere, somebody once said, because my mom had a vision problem. So my dad would do the seeing for her. He would read to her, and my dad had, typical, like maybe hard of hearing, would you call it. And my mom would talk loudly to him. So they were each other's eyes and ears. And I think the way they connected, as you get older, I feel like life gets smaller and you stay in more. And I think for them, the genius was they drew people in. You know, they loved educating and they loved having conversations. So by, you know, instead of like grandparents usually like, how's school? How is this? My parents would be like, okay, we need expressions, come on. And, you know, not just for their grandkids, but for friends or neighbors or the community. I mean, they were just kind of like little firecrackers. So I think that genius of how smart it was to keep themselves vibrant. And I think that I'm not a neurologist, but I think that to the end, they both were sharp as tacks. Great expression, but they were so sharp. And I think it's because they were constantly talking all the time about this.
Yeah.
And other things too.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you. This is perfect.
Thanks.
The book is available. Someone had asked a question if the book is out. Yes, it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, any place you
The Strand.
I was going to end on the Strand.
Sorry.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Beth Kobliner and Theresa DiMasi, for joining us. If anybody hasn't purchased the book already, there's a link at the bottom to purchase, so to speak. Thank you again for joining us, everybody. Those are some great questions. Everyone have a safe and healthy and happy holidays.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye at the Strand.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Sophia. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks
Bye.
for coming, everyone.